Hi, this is a video to talk about quoting and citing, and we'll also provide you with some examples to try out and then some feedback based off those examples. Before you get any further, I would highly recommend either getting something to write with and a piece of paper or opening up a blank doc in a new tab so you can try the examples out on your own before you get the feedback. So here we go. Once again, quoting is a main element of the Melcon paragraph writing process. We've talked about main idea and evidence, and now we are using quoting and citing to create better evidence. So this links in with the evidence portion of Melcon. So main idea is done, evidence, the idea of it is done. Now we're going to make our evidence even better by using quotes. So Melcon, once we get all these steps, the main idea, evidence, link, and conclusion, you're going to be able to write body paragraphs that answer a variety of questions and are well organized. This is going to be a good tool for you as you continue writing throughout school, and also a great way to organize your thoughts going forward. How does evidence connect to quoting and citing? Evidence is something that is used to help prove that the main idea that you created is right. Quoting, on the other hand, is taking the exact words of someone else and using them in your paper. You probably quote movies or stuff like that with your friends, so whether you know it or not, you've probably used some form of quoting before. But using a quote as evidence helps show your readers that you have sources that agree with your main idea. You can use other people's words and ideas to show that you are right. And the more that you do that, the stronger your argument is. When writing about literature or stories, like you would do in this class, using quotes as evidence is the strongest way to prove your main idea because you are using parts of the story to show you are right. Citing gives credit to the person whose words you've used, so a quote should always be paired with a citation. If you don't create a citation, you are actually stealing the work of someone else because you don't give them credit. This is also known as plagiarism, which we want to avoid. So, how are you going to be going about quoting and citing properly? There are different ways to do this, but this video is just going to cover one way so you can try it and hopefully get used to it and use it going forward. Remember, there are other ways to go about quoting, but this is just one effective way. So you can think of this as a formula. It's not the only one, but it's the one I like to use. And I also like to call it a quote sandwich. So you have the quote in the middle, you have the context before, and you have the citation after. So if you pair all three of these together, you're going to have a very strong quoted piece of evidence. The quote goes in the middle, and notice it's surrounded by these double quotation marks. Notice they're not the single ones. You want the double both at the beginning and at the end. There's no space in between the quotation mark and the word, so the quotation mark will point inward naturally when you type it. Quotes start with capital letters, so you want a capital letter at the beginning of your quote. The context beforehand, our context goes before the quote, has a comma that you see here. So you have the context, and then the comma, and then the quote. This context is connected to the quote by the use of the comma. The citation goes in parentheses, or this thing that you see here. You want them pointing towards each other, so it's like holding in the information. And then you place a period after the end of the citation to show all of this info goes together. So what is context? Probably a word you've heard before, but in terms of our writing about literature, it is giving some info to your reader in order for them to better understand a quote that you're about to give. Context tells the reader at least one of the following: who, what, when, where, why, the 5 W's. Without context, you can give a really good quote, but it probably isn't going to make sense. Readers need this extra information to make sense of a quote, especially if they haven't read the work that you're talking about. Context needs to connect to the quote, and you can do that by using a comma. There are other ways. Once again, this is just one way to go about doing it, but this is a very effective way. Using a comma to connect context, and you're doing that because you do not want to start a sentence with a quote. Basically, if your context is before and it's not connected, it may cause problems. So some examples of context. Oftentimes, there are two really good ways to provide meaningful context to a quote to make it easier to understand. One is explaining who is speaking. So if the quote is dialogue, someone in the story says it, explaining who is talking is excellent context. Your reader knows which character is speaking and expressing themselves. You could also explain what's happening in the scene. This is especially helpful when the quote is narration or something that the narrator is saying, not necessarily a character speaking. You can often pair these two things together as well to create even better context. A couple simple examples of context that you might see before a quote are listed here. So for example, Jerry explained. So this is doing this one here. It's telling me who is talking before the quote is done. So it sounds like we're doing some dialogue. As Sarah raced toward the door. So this is happening for what's happening in the scene. This gives me an idea of what's happening before the scene is actually explained or described. As the dog barked, same thing, telling me what's happening in the scene. And then Michael Jordan yelled, so it's telling me who's talking. Notice, none of these things right here are sentences. They are fragments or pieces of a sentence, but they need to be connected to the quote with a comma because they all explain something about the quote. So this does not stand alone as a sentence. If you just typed Jerry explained, period, that's not a complete thought. What did he explain? Tell me in the quote, connect these two things using a comma. So the purpose of context, you can think of it as a way to help the reader see the scene. When you can visualize something that you're reading, that means that the text is doing a good job of giving you all the information that you need. So giving extra context is going to help your reader understand what you're talking about even better. Context makes it easier for a reader to understand the quote. And you really want this because a reader who fully understands the points you are trying to make is going to be able to better agree with what you are trying to say. And in red down here, this is a big thing. This is something I might possibly write down or try and remember in the future. Two questions you can almost always ask yourself when you are trying to provide context is who's talking and what is happening. And if you can explain either or both of these things before you give a quote, it's going to be much easier for your reader to understand. Context is everything. So quoting. Remember, quoting is using someone's words exactly as they are written. You are literally copying the words that you see in a text. Quotes are surrounded by these double quotation marks once again and starts with a capital letter. You are not putting the period in the quote. This goes after the citation, not after the quote. So we will see an example of that shortly. There's one period when you are doing a quote sandwich or context quote citation, and it goes all the way at the end after the citation. The quote should work to provide evidence that your main idea is right. If your quote does not do that, you need to find something else to quote. The whole purpose of using quotes is to provide evidence that you are correct. So if it doesn't help or it's not clear, find something different. Citations and citing. A citation gives credit to the writer of the words that you quoted or used. This is really important. Giving credit makes it okay to use other authors' work. Not giving credit is bad. This can result in plagiarism, which carries with it a whole set of negative consequences. It's definitely something you want to avoid because it will often lead to either low scores, like 0, or redoing a lot of work in the future. So it's just best to avoid this mistake. That being said, let's learn how to avoid this mistake by creating citations. So how to do it. A citation has 4 parts. Let's look at some examples to get an idea of what they are. So here's a sample citation right here. And then here's a sample format for a citation. So we can kind of pair these two together to get a good idea of what a citation is and what it needs. You start with a parenthesis at the beginning. Notice you see that in both of them. It is pointing inward to keep the information inside. You have the author's last name, for example, Smith. Last names are proper nouns, so that means it needs to start with a capital letter every time. So the last name only, you have a space after that. Notice there's no comma, number sign, the word page, anything like that. Simply one space and then a number. This is the page number of the text as to where you found the quote. So if I'm looking for something, say you quoted Smith 82, I'm going to go to the work that Smith created, and I'm going to open it up to the 82nd page, and I should see the exact words that you quoted there that you have in your paper. At the end, you have another parenthesis closing the information in, so once again pointing inward, and then a period at the end to show that you are completely finished. So parentheses, last name, page number, period. Those are the 4 components. Some important details just to recap again. You're going to want to capitalize that last name because it's a proper noun, specific name of a person. There is nothing but a single space in between the author's last name and the page number. None of the extra stuff. The period goes right after the last parenthesis, and there are no extra spaces. So you don't put an extra space here, you don't put 3 spaces here, you don't put a space between the parenthesis and the period. You have a space here and everything else is touching. With all that being said, I think it's time for some examples. So the way that we're going to be doing this, you're going to receive some information about a scene from a text. You're going to have a sample to use as a quote. And you're going to have the author's full name, the title of the work, and then the page number that your quote would be on. You're going to use some of this information and some of it you're going to ignore, but it's best to have all this information for these examples because this is what you're going to do in real class when you're writing quotes on your own. So it's best to figure out what to keep, what to ignore, and we're going to give it a try. So your job, based off all this information that you're going to be getting, is to organize it as a quoted piece of information, of evidence in this format. You want the context with a comma, our quote with quotation marks and a capital at the beginning, and then a citation with our parenthesis, capitalized last name, the page number the work is on, parenthesis, period. Please write this format down or type it into your doc and any other info you think you need before you try these examples. If you can get this information into this format, your quotes are going to be looking really good for when you're writing on your own. So if you need to, pause the video so you can write this format down as a guide to help you with these examples, and go ahead and click play when you are ready to see the examples. So here we go. Our first example, our background info, which is another word for something we've been talking about. Carl is giving a speech to his history class. What is said or what happens? So this is going to be the information that you'd want to include in your paper as evidence. In the speech, Carl says dinosaurs are the fiercest animals of all time. The author of this work would be Diana Franklin. The title of the book would be Carl and the Dinos. And then the page that the quote or the text is found on is page 98. You should be writing this info in the proper evidence format that we have discussed today: context, quote, citation. So go ahead and pause this video to write this down on your own and click play when you are ready for some feedback. All right, we're looking at a possible answer here. So we're rearranging this info into an answer. Notice we have a color-coded guide down here to help make sense of how the answer was created. We have our context being orange. Remember, who is talking, what is happening in the scene. So you could have said a bunch of different things, but one good thing is who's talking? Carl is talking. So Carl said, this is not a complete sentence, so we have a comma to connect it to the quote. Then we have our quote in blue, exactly what our character is saying. We're copying it word for word. Dinosaurs are the fiercest animal of all time. It's exact quote, exact words, starting with a double quotation mark, a capital, and then a quotation mark at the end to close it out. And then our last name and page number in our parentheses followed by a period. This is our citation. So we took the last name of the author. We ignored the first name, and we put it right after our first parenthesis. We ignored the title of the book. That does not go in a citation. And then we found the page it was on. All we did was write the number with a space right after the last name, close our parentheses, and put a period at the end. So our correct answer, or one correct answer, could be Carl said, our context, dinosaurs are the fiercest animals of all time, our quote, exactly worded, and then our citation of last name, page number, period. So let's try another one. Good try. So, background info, the wind is blowing. What is said or what happens? Belle held on to the book like it might flutter away at any second. The author is Dana Maris. The title of the book is Belle's Birthday. And the page the text is found on is page 12. So you're going to want to write this in the format of context, quote, citation. Go ahead and pause this video to write that out. Take your time. Make sure you try and get all the details down, like where does the period go? What type of letter goes at the beginning of a quote? What do we use to connect context with the quote? All those great things. So pause it, try this out, and click play when you are ready for some feedback on your answer. All right, our answer for our second example would be, once again, color-coded, our context, when the wind is blowing, or was blowing. This is not a complete sentence, so we need a comma to connect it with our quote. Belle held on to the book like it might flutter away at any second, word for word, copying the quote that we wanted to take from the text. We do not have a period at the end of our quote. That period goes at the end of the citation, like we see here. And inside our parentheses of our citation is the author's last name, Maris, and then the page number 12 with only a space in between. So for example, this is a really good one to take a look at if you're missing context. If you are writing a paper and you just say, Belle held on to the book like it might flutter away at any second, my first thought is going to be, why? What's going on? Is it a magical book? Is she running? Is there bad weather? What's the deal? And then when we get this context, when the wind was blowing, it goes, oh, okay. So it was windy out, she's probably outside, and she was worried about losing her book. That's why. So that extra information goes a long way into helping the reader understand the message behind the quote and what's going on. We got two more examples. So here's number 3, our background info. A fly is buzzing around the room. What is said or what happens? Mr. Ed smacked the table. Our author is Cale Connors. The title of our text is The Sly Fly. And then the page that our quote would be found on is page 45. So we want to organize this into context, quote, citation. Go ahead and pause this video to write down your answer, and then go ahead and click play when you are ready to get some feedback on the answer that you've written. Okay, here we go with our answer. So, taking this info and putting it into our context quote citation format. Our context, when the fly buzzed around the room. Okay, so I know what's going on. My quote, the words I took exactly from the text, Mr. Ed smacked the table. So the context helped me realize why he smacked the table. Maybe he was annoyed that the fly was buzzing around. Maybe he was trying to swat it. Otherwise, if we just know that he's smacking the table, it could be for any reason at all. But now we know it's connected to what was happening in the scene. So we have our context, setting up our quote itself, the exact words. And then we have our citation. Starting with the parenthesis, we have the last name of the author, the last name only, the page number with only a space in between, followed by a parenthesis and then a period at the end to show that this is the end of our entire piece of evidence here. We don't want to put it here because then this shows that our citation is not connected. We want that period at the very end after the citation to show everything is working together. Last example, so let's give it a try. Background info, Jake was talking to his wife. What was said? Emily earned a promotion at work. Our author is J. Rawlings, and then the title of the book is The Party Singer. The page that we find this quote on is 123. So give me one more pause. Write out your answer of context, quote, citation with all the extra details that we need to make sure it is grammatically correct. Press play when you're ready to hear some feedback for your answer. All right, last answer review. I know what you're thinking, it's about time, but we're almost there. So our background info, Jake was talking to his wife and said, so this is a dialogue, this is a character speaking. We have our quote, Emily earned a promotion at work, exactly like we saw in the text. So we're writing it word for word with some quotation marks and a capital at the beginning. And then we have our citation, parentheses, last name, page number, parentheses, period. We take our author's last name, Rawlings. We take the page number we found it on, 123. Put that in between a set of parentheses and then put a period at the end to show this is the end of our evidence sentence. All right, so to wrap up, for literary analysis, when we're writing about things that we've read, we are using quotes and citations as evidence to help prove our main idea is correct. We're taking directly from the text that we're reading to provide evidence that our main idea is spot on. We're going to use some context to introduce a quote. Two great questions you can ask yourself to create some context would be, who is speaking in this quote, or what was happening as this quote is going on? Set the scene. Quotes are the exact words seen in another text. You are taking the words literally word for word from a text and typing them into your own paper for the purpose of showing that your main idea is correct. And then the reason that it is okay to do that is because we are giving credit to the writer who created those words in the first place by using a citation to show where the quote came from and who wrote it. Thanks for watching. Feel free to reference this video whenever you need it, especially once you start writing on your own. That format is going to be very helpful for you to create meaningful quotes that prove your point. And then the quotes set up with the quotation marks, the capital, and then our citation set up with our parenthesis, last name of the author, our page number, a parenthesis, and a period. Those two parts are never going to change. So as long as we can master that concept, our writing is going to take a major step forward.